Everybody, and welcome to the GGNA DonorScape webinar, Homegrown Affinity Ratings, a case study from Ripon College. I'm Kat Banakis, Manager for Client Engagement and Support at Grenzenbach Gleer and Associates Analytics, and I'm joined today by Lisa Ellis, Director of Prospect Management and Research at Ripon College. As a matter of housekeeping, we will be stopping the webinar at key points to answer any questions you might have. To submit a question, hover over the green bar at the top of your screen until you see the chat, Q&A conversation bubble, and be sure to send the question to host, which is my colleague Catherine, who will be facilitating all of the questions. Following today's webinar, we'll be sending out a link recording of today's webinar, along with the PowerPoint presentation and also a transcript of any questions we aren't able to get to during today's webinar. If you experience any technical difficulties at all, please email my colleague Catherine Julitz at cjulitz@grenzgleer.com. That's CJULITZ at GRENZGLIER.com, or you can call the meeting provider WebEx directly at 1-866-229-3239. That's 866-229-3239. And now to the reason we're all here, the content of today's webinar. I was so excited when I found Lisa and her story about what they had done at Ripon College in creating their own in-house homegrown affinity ratings. And I was particularly excited to bring this story to all of you because Lisa is a person who came into this without a strong technical background. They developed it in-house as a group and with very little time and very little money, and now they have an incredible real-time, always updating affinity rating system throughout the development office and moving into things throughout campus life. So I was so delighted to be able to bring Lisa's story to all of you because it's just a great case. So Lisa, thank you for being here today.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you for the kind words.
So to get started, would you just tell us a little bit about Ripon and the campus and the development office there?
Sure. Ripon College is located in central Wisconsin in a small town called Ripon. We're famous for Ripon Good cookies, actually. And our college enrollment in 2011 was just over 1,000 students, which is pretty close to our capacity. We have about 15,000 living alumni. And as far as our development staff size goes, we have 18 folks in our office, which also encompasses our alumni and parent relations staff, annual fund, marketing, and communications. And then out of that, we have 7 major gift officers, including our plan giving director and our VP.
So not huge.
No.
By any stretch.
Yeah, we're a pretty small staff. I forgot our grant writer. We also have a grant writer. So we do a lot on a little, which I'm sure a lot of people listening are familiar with that scenario.
And you actually, your background before you came to Ripon was somewhat in grant writing and related things, right?
Right. As I mentioned before, I just wanted to make sure people understood that it was where I'm working is a one-person research shop where I'm in charge of doing prospect management, research, report writing, and analytics, but I don't have any advanced degrees in statistics or computer programming or analytics of any sort. In fact, I have a bachelor's degree in cultural anthropology and sociology, and I have over 15 years experience in nonprofit management and fundraising, that have kind of scoped the fields of social services, adult literacy, and the arts, and now, as of 4 years ago, higher education. So since I've been at Ripon, I hadn't worked in higher ed before, but I was no stranger to raising money, grant writing, and cultivating relationships with donors.
And you also had no background in computer programming, right?
No, because when you work for small nonprofits, you don't have a lot of resources, and so you make your own Excel spreadsheets, and you make do with what you have. And so this was the first organization I worked for that had a donor management system that was campus-wide. Our college uses a system called Genzabar, and that was the first time that I was in that situation as well.
So when you got there, there was Genzabar, and then what were the other sort of data things that you came into that were available on the prospects?
Sure. Well, what we didn't have was we didn't have a budget to purchase any fancy predictive modeling software. Using the complicated regression models, which I've sat in on webinars for different products that are selling some wonderful products out there. But I'm a novice who really wanted to learn and understand our data, how it was maintained, the history of it, and what it means. And as we were entering a feasibility study in preparation for a campaign, we were consulting with GGNA, and we had gone through a screening and had identified the need to clarify and define our prospect rating system into two distinct areas, and that being capacity ratings and affinity scores. And we knew that we had, go ahead.
No. So you had done just a wealth screening on capacity with GGNA, and then you had a prospect rating system in-house. Right.
We had a prospect. Well, we had wealth scores, and I know that we'll get to it in the next slide, but we just knew that where we were sitting when we had that screening done was we had decided on a tiering level. And I was new, and I went with the flow, and they had already determined folks who we thought would be in this A and B category. And what was happening was we didn't even have C's at the very beginning. It was just the A's and B's. We took about the top 1,000 prospects that were identified through the screening to be our best prospects, and that was identified before I came. And then when we started, we had A's who were rated above $50,000, and those were our top-tier prospects.
Sure.
And certainly that's very vague, and because that could, what did that really mean? That could mean a $50,000 donor, a $500,000 donor, or a $5 million donor. And so that's obviously a very wide range. As time went on, we created the B category. And we started to, our capacity ratings started to morph into a mixture of both capacity and affinity, which were unfortunately sometimes based on subjective opinions and gut feelings. So for example, someone who started as an A based on a wealth screening might have been dropped down to a B because the discussion went around the concept of, well, maybe they're rated at $500,000, but I know that we'll never get more than $30,000 from them, so let's make them a B. And so then all of a sudden this mixture started happening, and I was starting to lose my mind a little bit.
So what did you then do to parse it out?
Well, it got a little worse after that because we actually started our C's, and those were the people that we just didn't want to lose off of our radar, our major gift prospect.
It had to get worse before it could get better.
Yeah. And I didn't want to go to the D's, so because I had no idea what that would be. And really the C's were starting to bring in this idea of readiness. It was, okay, well maybe they're rated at this level, but they'll only give us 25, but they're not ready yet, so we don't want to, lose track of these people. And so these definitions of these tiers changed and evolved over time to meet our needs with no real consistency. And so that was the real problem. So over time, it was clear we had to separate capacity and affinity,
Okay.
and it had to be data-driven. So,
which did you decide to tackle first?
The first thing we decided to do is clean up the capacity ratings because we had done the screening. We were given some really good advice since we were about to go into a campaign to look at our capacity scores and ratings and to make them much more defined and to put them into the ranges that mirrored our gift pyramid going into the campaign. And that was really helpful to prepare for the campaign because we could see how many prospects we needed in each of the ranges to be successful when it came down to asking, because the standard has gone from 3 to 1 to 4 to 1 prospects needed to actually close a gift.
Sure.
And so that was really helpful.
And so just to back up a little bit on timeline, you got there to Ripon in 2008.
Right.
And then 2009, you realized the tiering system and all it was, and you put in the new capacity-only tiers in 2010.
Correct.
Okay. And then the campaign is still coming up, and at that point, you wanted to do the affinity on top of it.
Exactly, because we wanted to make sure that we were defining those two different criteria separately, which really helped to keep us focused, I guess, on looking at our best prospects in our prospect management meetings going forward with qualifying people for the campaign.
And the campaign was coming up, and it sounds like there was just sort of a kismet of perfect timing with what you were then able to do with affinity ratings.
Right. I had, of course, joined APRA. It was the first conference that I went to. I think I was only on campus for a week before I went to APRA, one of their symposiums for new researchers. And after I got my feet wet for about a year and a half, I had gone to a local chapter meeting and met Patrick O'Toole from the University of Wisconsin Foundation, and he presented on their donor affinity calculator model. And this was exactly what I wanted to bring back to my shop, although I was a little bit apprehensive because it sometimes can be overwhelming to hear wonderful, successful projects by really large institutions, and
right.
Certainly UW-Wisconsin is a very large institution and very successful.
Yeah, the student population alone is a mid-sized city.
Right, yep.
Yeah.
So he went through, why they had a problem, what they looked at trying to achieve. We had a lot of similarities, just the numbers were different. And he shared with us his process for doing that. And so, I can't take all the credit for what I'm sharing with you here, other than the fact that I guess I wasn't scared by the fact that I couldn't come back and do it here because we were very close to our data here, and I knew that I could somehow provide a model that we could use that would meet our needs. And, of course, it was modified in many different ways, but it was the starting point to actually capturing what we felt was affinity by our prospects.
But before you could, execute on this, there was a sizable amount of buy-in from the rest of the team that needed to happen. So how did you, what did you pitch to them? How did you get that moving inside?
Sure. Well, I was often frustrated, I guess. I mean, I have a great team, don't get me wrong, and our gift officers are doing a wonderful job, and we have great relationships. We really do. But I guess being new helped. But I was frustrated when I would find great people on paper, and then somebody who had been here for a while maybe felt like they knew more about the person personally, that kind of threw away everything I had on paper, I guess is the way to say it. they just kind of wanted to say, no, well, you know, that's great, but this person's never going to do that, or,
right.
you know, there's a problem with this. So that's what happened, and so I knew that I needed to figure out how to identify the best prospects where it was data-driven and not so subjective. And so I wanted to make sure that we could identify these people, and so that at meetings I could show that these are our best prospects because they do have the highest intersect between capacity and affinity, and that the affinity was not based on people's opinions, but the affinity would be based on real actions and behaviors that people exhibited when engaging with the college in many different ways.
And so you started out by gathering all of the different folks that could be possible stakeholders in this in order to develop something a little bit data-driven. So can you take us through who all had to come to the table on it?
Sure. Well, of course, I ran this all by my VP first. And
good idea.
Yep. He was excited to kind of get the clarity as well. And he was new at the time as well, you know, so that I think
can help.
Yeah, the synergy of that dynamic can help for sure. And so I first met with the directors here in our development office, and then I met with their staff, including alumni affairs. I met with the gift officers, and we talked about what actions and behaviors to them indicated affinity to the college. And we were really talking about affinity versus an inclination to give a major gift. And I know that those two terms are sometimes used
interchangeably.
Interchangeably, thank you. But to me, they're a little different. And I think all of us researchers out there and prospect managers, we're so focused on keeping things separate and identifying what means what. And to me, I had to keep it separate in my head that I wasn't, certainly the end goal is to get a major gift, but we were really looking at affinity to the college at all levels of giving. So that was how it was proposed to them. One of the really important people that I met with was somebody who's been working at our institution for over 40 years with all of the data, and she's our stewardship and database coordinator. And she really helped me look at the data very minutely and how to look at the history and what data we could really count on, and what data was still good data, what data we didn't use anymore, how codes had changed, so that I had a reference point, so I knew when it came to coding and writing the queries for the different actions that meant affinity, I wasn't shooting myself in the foot by using bad data with current data. And then, of course, the most important person was our IT person. We have one IT person that supports all of the departments on campus, and so he's extremely valuable and very busy.
And busy.
Yeah. And I didn't want to be kind of in the queue for, you know, the project that I needed to happen sooner than later. So he worked really close with me to get me to understand and be somewhat self-reliant with working with the database and writing some of the queries myself.
And how did that play out? So you approached him, you said, I think I want to do this and I need some help, and then did he basically teach you like a primer on SQL?
No, I had already gone through it's kind of a self-study for the report writer for the Genzibar system. And so, you know, I had some working knowledge. I came back and showed him the actual calculator draft that UW Foundation was using, and we just had a discussion about it because I knew that we were capturing some of the data that they were using. I knew we weren't capturing all of it, and I knew that there were things we were capturing that they weren't that I wanted to use. And, of course, the whole scoring and weighting and writing the scripts behind the scenes to make this happen live in the database was well beyond my capabilities. But he knew where I eventually wanted to get to and why it was important. And he understood the importance of taking on this project. And so we probably met about 10 times over 8 months. And we're ready to go live with the actual Affinity calculator within a year.
All right, let's take a look at that Affinity calculator. This is beautiful. Can you just, in brief summary, sort of walk us through it and how you and your teams at Ripon sort of modified this or weighted it, and how it came to be in these percentages and breakouts?
Sure. Well, that was a lot of the discussion that we had with the major gift staff, alumni relations, and my VP, was to look at what are the factors that we think show that somebody has an affinity towards our college, that we feel comfortable about the data that's in the system and how consistently it's been put in over a certain amount of time. And the categories along the left side of prospect management, household commitment, plan giving, events, and groups, those were areas that UW Foundation had suggested in the workshop that we were in. But how that middle section was defined, that was all what was decided by our college. And we knew that this wasn't going to be the be-all to end-all. And we haven't changed it yet, and I know we'll get to a little bit later ways that we hope to improve on this. I was really cautious and worried about, how scientific do I have to be? Do I have to do regression models? What makes the best prospect the best prospect? I put information out on the APRA listserv. I got a lot of information back. Some of it I couldn't understand. And I just thought, well, you know what, let's go with this. UW Foundation did it. We can do it. And anything is better than what we had before, which was nothing. And so that was my starting point. And that's really, where we're at right now, is using this, and over time we'll see how it works. But we wanted to look at the face-to-face visits, actually getting an appointment with somebody to sit and talk with them about making a major plan gift to Ripon, and we thought that that was important. The household commitment, of course, giving is a component of Affinity, but that has issues too, and this is probably the main area that I have issues with, is that there are people who have a lot of love for your institution, but they might not necessarily have the capacity to give, and we don't want to, have them have negative points, against them. And one thing people might be wondering is, how do these points add up? They are all cumulative. So you would get, the best score you could get would be 100, and you could score in every single one of these categories. And if, like you mentioned, if somebody had more than one face-to-face visit, would they get 5 points twice? No, they wouldn't. They would just get it once. But if they gave it $100,000 or more, they would also get 5 points for giving it $50,000 or more and $10,000 or more. And so we thought this was a good starting point, and some of the groups at the bottom were very different than what UW Foundation was using. And I'm not sure how many of the on and off campus or alumni weekend events were being tracked and that type of thing. And so the percentages and the scoring and weighting, that was really, we went back and forth a lot on that, and that's what we came up with.
And then you, for your, the bands here that they're broken out into, the descriptors, and the bands were taken from the UW work and their work with the outside definitions, just to have sort of standard definitions and text on all of it, right?
Right, yep. The definitions came from something called the Donor Commitment Continuum that was put out by Advancement Resources, LLC, and they had these definitions for each one of these categories. And so if somebody scored within those ranges, that would be the area that of affinity that would show up on their score for us. And so it's a nice wide range, not too wide, and the results kind of ended up showing some of the things that we already knew, which means that it kind of works, but but it also helped us find the people in the middle, and especially the people that still had a really good capacity rating and maybe had a middle-of-the-road interest or experience affinity rating, and it was based on data, not on opinions.
To that end, I want to jump ahead, and this is just the SQL programming and an example of that, and we can go back to that in a bit if we need to. But those people in the middle were sort of where the rubber met the road on this affinity rating when you went to test it. So can you walk us through how you actually tested the draft with your gift officers and what happened and how that played out?
Sure. Well, once we got all the coding in the system, my IT person wrote a script that every night at midnight the codes would be live and they would actually be visible for every record in our system, and not just our major gift pool. And it was based on the criteria that we just discussed. And so we could see everybody's score and where they fell in the definition. And so this was something UW Foundation did as well. And I thought it was really important for buy-in. And at a director's meeting, we sat around the table and I provided a list of 10 prospects. And they were all well-known prospects, not necessarily for their high giving, but they were all people that everyone knew. And I asked them, they were listed in no particular order, and I had asked the staff to go ahead and rate them 1 to 10 with the person who you thought had the highest affinity down to the lowest, without seeing what their scores were, of course, based on the affinity calculator. So then after they did that, I went through everyone and told them how they actually did score out based on the affinity calculator. And some of the folks they were surprised at, and others they weren't, of course. And it really did show that if we keep the data current in the system and we can sometimes look at the data, the science and the art combination that people always talk about, it will help to kind of get rid of these anecdotal conversations that sometimes tend to halt discussions about the potential of somebody giving a major gift. And so that was really interesting, and it was done in a soft way so that there was that kind of buy-in. And so we started to talk a little bit more about maybe we should change the calculator a little bit, maybe we should keep it the same, and then, I don't think we changed it after that, and that was the one we went with.
And has the testing of whether the bands and the weighting and everything, whether it worked, that's sort of being tested in real time. Is that right? That you can't really test it until you're trying to see whether some gifts result out of it, but there's no way to really do that beforehand.
Right. We do look at the intersect of where our prospects fall in this graph of the intersection between affinity and capacity, and that's presented every month at our prospect management meetings. And so what's really going to be interesting over time is to see how people move through that chart, kind of from the bottom left, the bottom right to the left, and then the upper right to the left, because certainly young alumni, may not be at the high ranking capacity ranges that others are, which right now is affecting their affinity levels the way the calculator works. But it's going to be interesting to see, because we're just about ready to go public with our campaign, and at the end of the campaign we'll be able to look at where the percentages panned out at the beginning of the campaign as opposed to 5 years later, and then hopefully we can draw some conclusions from that.
And right now, you've got it set up so that their affinity score is actually changing in real time because of the way you wrote the SQL code. So can you talk us through a little bit how that happens, and also how that's created some in-house incentives for recording data?
Sure. I think going back to the original discussion about how everybody was involved at the beginning and how the data processes were set forth and what the protocol was when we have events, and how we track attendance, and how we do our contact reports, and how we code different volunteering opportunities, it kind of brought all these processes to light again, and we really kind of cleaned them up. And I guess that's, from my perspective, a really nice side point that happened without me realizing that it would happen. And I think they all feel like now that we're all a part of this process in a kind of a more collaborative way. And so when gift officers look at their profiles for their prospects when they go out on visits, they can see that some of the information that they've put into the system has not only affected the affinity score, like when they go out on a visit, meet with somebody, and they put that contact in, that might be the first face-to-face visit, and it might push that prospect up into another affinity level. Or if the prospect came to alumni weekend and then also made a gift, that could actually change their affinity score in real time. So like I had mentioned, the process runs behind the scenes by magic, I'd like to think, but it doesn't. And every day the affinity scores could change. And that's what's really nice about it, is I can pull the data from the tables and run some pivot tables for really quick analysis to see how those cells in that quad chart, how the numbers in those cells change over time.
And so every night at midnight, it's pulling in the contact reports from Genzabar, the event attendance, the volunteering, and updating their scores every night, right?
Right. Yep.
That's so cool. And how has that, the fact that it's up and running and that people are participating in it, how are people then using it sort of day to day?
Sure. Well, our gift officer staff, they use it when they fill their travel pools, when they get their what we call anchor visits, or the people who are their highest priority visits to meet with, and then they'll call other prospects, and if they're having trouble trying to fill appointments, they will fill their pool with our suspects. And when they look at the suspects, they'll look at people who have the highest affinity and capacity ratings, because they're probably the folks that they'll have the best chance of getting to take their call, getting to set that appointment with them, and meeting with them. So that's been handy. It kind of helps. We're such a small group of people with a large number of prospects to see, and all of this helps us to stay focused and prioritize who we should spend our time on next. I kind of alluded to this before, but events and visits really matter, and so I constantly say that in our prospect management meetings. Sometimes people feel a little beaten down over time, and they feel like they're not getting anywhere with somebody, and we always go back to the fact that every visit counts and every visit matters, because we're cultivating relationships. It will help in the long run and it's important, the work that they're doing, and they see that that's really important to continue to get the data into the system. And so my staff are really good at getting their contact reports into the system, and they see why it matters, not only for the history and for that ongoing relationship, but also for some of these other things that go into play.
And by separating out the affinity and the wealth in your system, people are able to see, yeah, I'm pouring time into somebody where there is actually capacity, and we're building the relationship in a place where we could get some financial traction at this point, which has to help.
Right, and on the other side of the coin too is, we'll have discussions about people who love to visit with us that are midway in their career, and they just don't have that capacity, but boy, there's somebody to be looking out for, 10 years from now. And so we're always looking towards the future, because there's always that next campaign, of course.
Sure.
So it's been helpful, like your bullet point says, to limit the anecdotal conversation, and it keeps everybody focused on the data, the priorities. And it's been, I think that they've really liked to use the quad chart. I can look at each gift officer's prospects, and I can create this chart for them so they can see who falls into which quadrant. When I am researching suspects, I've got a pool of about 850 suspects that I'm looking at right now. I'm one person. And so I will look at the people with the highest capacity and highest affinity, and that will be the chunk of people that I'll prioritize my research on. And those will be the people that, after I've verified that this is the person that we're looking at and that they're a good prospect for a major gift, then I'll recommend them at a prospect management meeting to be assigned, and go ahead and assign them to the solicitor and feel good about it because it was based on this data.
Yeah. Now that it's up and running, and you're able to see how it's being used, what are you hoping for next on it? What's the next horizon?
Well, there are things that we aren't tracking that we would like to track in our office, or there are better ways that I think we could be collaborating with other people on campus. And I think that segmenting out affinity to the arts and athletics are two that just come to mind right away. We have different friends groups, like I'm sure a lot of colleges have, and to be able to track their affinity would be great. And of course, I had mentioned the campaign testing, being able to look at a 5-year span and how if this affinity has kind of shown or tested itself to be something that is working, or if we need to tweak it a little bit. And one area that is kind of a goal for me this year is to really take out that the wealth and the number of years giving, because even though we were blending affinity and capacity when we were having discussions about prospects, I was still really concerned that we really didn't get away from that with the affinity calculator. But that argument of, giving a gift does mean affinity, I still thought maybe it was a little too heavily weighed in the area of the amount of money people are giving versus how much they love the college versus how many years they've been giving, and that was kind of skewed to older, wealthy donors. And so I'm really looking at taking that whole giving section out and swapping it out for an RFM score, and then taking the RFM score and looking at the high and low scores for that, and then attributing some sort of value to their RFM score related to affinity. So it's kind of really removing it, or maybe just taking it out altogether. I'm not sure yet what I'm going to do. I hope I didn't confuse everybody by that.
We're going to take out one conflated score and put in another.
Yeah.
So we did get one question in, and I think we sort of addressed it, but the question just wanted to clarify whether you, when you were developing the calculator, if you did any testing retroactively of whether or not the bands worked in what you were setting up. You know, we think that these things are going to contribute, but looking back historically on what led to gifts, whether you looked back at all on it.
Right. Well, in a sense we did. That's a really good question. It's kind of a loaded answer because I did have to look at what data I could really count on, and I couldn't go that far back. And so this is really a new system for us. Things were tracked much differently or not tracked at all going back before, I would say, 2007. So, I mean, we're really new at feeling comfortable about the data. But the other part of my answer is that we did look at our best donors as far as what makes them our best donors. And we looked at their attributes. And we looked at, you know, if we could have 50% of our donor pool look like this, what would they look like? And so we did model, you know, people who are really engaged with the college, give donations, and what were the things that led to them giving those donations. And we tried to look at those attributes and see what we had. But it kind of will continue to be an ongoing testing process.
Yeah.
And it's only going to get better.
Yeah, and when we also had a question about whether you tested how many people were falling into the 6 banded categories. So were you trying to parse it out at all so that there were even numbers falling into them, or was it okay if there was a big group of folks at one particular level of ownership?
Well, we didn't know what the results were going to be.
Okay,
and,
sure.
And we, you know, at first I thought we were just going to do this based on our prospect pool, our major gift prospect pool, which is, well, I don't know, like 1,500 folks or so. But when I met with my IT guy, you know, all of the data that we were looking at existed or didn't exist in every record. And so every record in our database has an affinity score. You know, non-donors have an affinity score.
Low.
Have an affinity score. So it's really interesting to look at it in that way as well. Of course, my team focuses on the major gift part of it, but there are lots of other ways we can use these affinity scores with annual fund and some other things. So we had no idea how it would fall, but I did pull out a report that I have that shows kind of the percentages of where people fall, and it's been interesting to look at, you know, Quad 1 for us, we have 54 people in that section. So that's only 4% of our major gift prospect pool.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, in Quad 2, we have 17%. Which is 254 people. Well, 254 people for a staff of 8, you know, if we can really realize those gifts, that's a really positive thing to look forward to as far as bringing gifts in for the campaign. And then Quad 3 drops down to 10%. And then, of course, our largest number is in Quad 4, and that's 69%. So that's our active solicitable pool for major gifts.
The place to pull from.
Exactly.
Yeah. If you, for people who are listening in and don't have any sort of affinity thing set up and looking back on what you've done, would you have any sort of lessons learned or suggestions for people hearing this, but it sounds a bit overwhelming to start on? What would you offer?
I knew for my peace of mind that I would feel better about going forward. This was something that I could control. And I like to be able to control things. So
good self-knowledge, Lisa. That's positive.
You know, I think all of us in this field tend to be, you know, somewhat hard on ourselves as far as, you know, everything has to be perfect and the data has to be exact, and you know, we can't be that way all the time. And I just thought, well, let's try it. And you know, the most important thing that I can suggest is if you have somebody who supports you in IT, learn as much as you can on your own so that you don't have to be that person on the waiting list that, you know, your project's never going to come to fruition because it's always going to get bumped. You know, my day is split up into a lot of different roles and jobs, and the more I could streamline it, the easier I was able to prioritize, and so far, you know, things are flowing pretty well. And I'm able to have the numbers available for people when they ask me. And I just know that you can do it no matter what size your staff is if you have the backing of your leadership.
Absolutely. Well, Lisa, this has been just a joy. So thank you so much for your time today. And for everybody who's listening in, thank you also for being part of our session. If a question occurs to you after we hang up today and you think, oh, I really meant to ask that, just send me an email and we'll include the answer either directly or, if applicable, to everybody when we send it out next week with the recording. And we will also make the materials from today available. And Lisa has also said that she's happy to help out anybody who has questions and follow up. So we hope that today was helpful, informative, and if you have a great story you'd like to share or a topic that you think would be helpful or interesting in the future, just let us know. We're trying to make this as useful as possible. And Lisa, you have a great story, so thank you for all that went into creating it and for sharing it with all of us today. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.